My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34 years old. And 3 months ago, my sister Jessica called me a glorified secretary at our cousin's wedding reception. She said it loud enough for the entire family table to hear, rolling her eyes as she explained to our relatives how I just answer phones and file papers for some tech company nobody's heard of. What Jessica didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that I wasn't just an employee at DataFlow Solutions. I was the CEO and majority shareholder of a company worth $847 million. The look on her face when she found out? Priceless. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. What happened next changed everything between my sister and me forever. It exposed years of assumptions, jealousy, and family dynamics that I'd been too polite to address. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this all unfolded. Let me start from the beginning, because understanding my relationship with Jessica requires knowing our history. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, we were the daughters of immigrant parents who worked 18-hour days running a small corner market. My father, David, had been an engineer in Taiwan before coming to America. My mother, Linda, had a master's degree in literature but spent her days stocking shelves and operating the register. Jessica was born when I was 6, and from the moment she could walk, she commanded attention. She was the baby, the charmer, the one who could make our exhausted parents smile after their longest days. I became the responsible one, the helper, the daughter who quietly did homework while Jessica performed impromptu dance routines in our cramped living room above the store. The dynamic stuck. Throughout school, Jessica was the social butterfly, student council president, homecoming princess, accepted to UC Berkeley on a partial scholarship for her involvement in drama club. I was the quiet achiever, graduating valedictorian but somehow always feeling like I lived in her shadow. When family friends asked about us, they'd light up talking about Jessica's latest performance or boyfriend, then add, "And Sarah's doing well too," as an afterthought. After high school, I chose San Jose State for computer science, while Jessica headed to Berkeley for communications. Our parents beamed with pride about Jessica's prestigious university acceptance. When I graduated summa cum laude with a dual degree in computer science and business administration, the celebration was a quiet dinner at home. When Jessica graduated, they threw a party and invited half the neighborhood. The pattern continued into our 20s. Jessica bounced between marketing jobs at various startups, always full of excitement about the next big thing, always confident that her next position would be the breakthrough that made her rich and famous. She loved talking about her work, name-dropping executives she'd met, and deals she was supposedly helping to close. Meanwhile, I'd taken a junior developer position at a small software company called TechBridge Solutions in Palo Alto. I kept my head down, worked long hours, and learned everything I could about not just coding, but how businesses actually operated. I sat in on sales meetings, studied financial reports, and built relationships with clients who appreciated my technical knowledge and problem-solving skills. The difference was, Jessica broadcasted every minor success while I internalized every lesson learned. When she got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, she called everyone in the family. When I was promoted to lead developer after just 18 months, I mentioned it briefly at Sunday dinner, and the conversation quickly shifted to Jessica's new boyfriend who worked at Google. This is important context for what happened later, because by the time I was 25, I'd already started seeing patterns that my family missed entirely. Jessica had been laid off 3 times in 4 years. Her startup jobs kept disappearing when funding dried up or companies folded. But she was masterful at spinning each setback as a strategic career move, a chance to explore new opportunities and expand her skill set. I, meanwhile, had been quietly building something bigger. At TechBridge, I'd identified a massive inefficiency in how small and medium businesses managed their data workflows. Companies were using multiple software platforms that didn't communicate with each other, leading to hours of manual data entry, reporting errors, and missed opportunities. I spent my evenings and weekends developing a solution, a cloud-based platform that could integrate with existing business software and automate data synchronization. I called it DataFlow Solutions. I didn't tell my family about the project because I'd learned that sharing early-stage ideas with them usually led to well-meaning but discouraging questions about risk and practicality. By the time I was 27, I'd secured my first round of funding, $2. $3 million from a venture capital firm in Menlo Park. I used the money to hire a small team of developers and officially launch DataFlow Solutions as an independent company. I remained CEO while initially keeping my day job at TechBridge for financial security. The irony was delicious. While Jessica posted LinkedIn updates about attending networking events and exploring synergies in the digital marketing space, I was signing contracts with Fortune 500 companies who needed our data integration services. While she complained about unrealistic expectations at her various jobs, I was building a company culture that prioritized sustainable growth and employee satisfaction. Our family dinners became increasingly surreal. Jessica would dominate conversations with stories about her latest workplace drama, her difficult boss, her coworkers who didn't appreciate her innovative ideas. She'd ask me questions like, "Do you even have meetings at your little computer company?" Or, "Is it weird being the only girl in the office?" I'd smile politely and say things like, "It's going well," or, "The team is great." What I didn't mention was that by age 29, DataFlow Solutions had 47 employees across 3 offices, had been featured in TechCrunch as one of the most promising B2B startups, and was generating $23 million in annual revenue. My parents, bless them, had no framework for understanding what I did for work. When they asked, I'd explain that I helped businesses organize their information better. They'd nod politely and ask if I was making enough money to be comfortable, which seemed to be their primary concern. Jessica, meanwhile, always had exciting updates about her latest company's ping pong tables, free lunch Fridays, and team-building retreats. The family assumption became that Jessica worked for real companies with proper corporate structures, while I did something technical and boring at a small business nobody had heard of. Even when I moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in Palo Alto, which I paid for in cash, the family narrative was that tech workers got paid well for specialized skills, not that I might actually own something significant. Jessica's reaction to my new place was particularly revealing. She toured the space and said, "Wow, Sarah, your company must have great benefits. Do they help with housing costs in Silicon Valley?" When I explained that I'd purchased the condo myself, she assumed I'd taken out a massive mortgage and was probably house poor, despite the nice location. The truth was, by age 30, my personal net worth had crossed $15 million. DataFlow Solutions was being courted by major tech companies for acquisition deals, and I was regularly invited to speak at industry conferences about entrepreneurship and technical innovation. I'd been profiled in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list and had been invited to join the advisory board of my alma mater's business school. But at family gatherings, I was still Sarah the computer programmer, while Jessica remained Jessica the marketing professional with the exciting career. The breaking point came last spring at our cousin Michael's wedding, though the foundation had been cracking for years. Jessica had been laid off from her 4th startup job and was living with our parents while exploring opportunities. She'd been out of work for 3 months and was becoming increasingly bitter about the tech industry's unrealistic expectations and toxic work culture. During this period, she developed a habit of making passive-aggressive comments about how tech workers were overpaid for doing meaningless work that doesn't help real people. She'd make jokes about keyboard warriors who thought they were changing the world by moving numbers around on screens. I bit my tongue through these comments because I understood that Jessica was struggling, and I didn't want to add to her stress by correcting her assumptions about my work. DataFlow Solutions was actually helping small businesses streamline their operations, reduce costs, and focus on serving their customers instead of wrestling with inefficient software systems. We'd helped a chain of independent bookstores compete with Amazon by optimizing their inventory management. We'd enabled a network of food trucks to coordinate their locations and reduce waste. Our work had real impact, but I didn't feel the need to defend it to someone who was clearly projecting her own frustrations. The situation escalated when Jessica started applying for jobs and began asking for my help with her networking. She'd learned that I had connections in tech and wanted me to introduce her to people who might be hiring for marketing positions. This created an awkward situation because many of my professional contacts knew me as the CEO of DataFlow Solutions, not as someone's sister who could make introductions. When I offered to connect her with marketing directors at companies we worked with, she'd inevitably ask me to talk her up as someone with extensive experience in startup environments. These conversations were delicate because I had to balance Jessica's job search needs with my professional reputation. I couldn't oversell her qualifications to contacts who trusted my judgment, but I also wanted to support my sister's career transition. I ended up making a few strategic introductions and emphasizing Jessica's communication skills and enthusiasm while being honest about her experience level. Jessica landed interviews at 2 companies through these connections, but didn't receive offers from either. Her feedback to me was that both companies were looking for someone more technical and that she felt like the interviews had been a waste of time. She started making comments about how tech companies had unrealistic expectations for marketing roles and were biased against people from traditional marketing backgrounds. Around this time, our cousin Michael announced his engagement to his longtime girlfriend, Emma. They planned an elegant wedding at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, with a reception dinner for 200 guests. Our extended family was excited because it had been years since we'd had a major family celebration, and Michael's success as a corporate attorney made this a particularly grand affair. Jessica saw the wedding as an opportunity to network and rebuild her professional confidence. She spent weeks shopping for the perfect outfit, getting her hair and makeup professionally styled, and preparing talking points about her diverse marketing experience across multiple high-growth startups. I, meanwhile, was dealing with a major business milestone. DataFlow Solutions had just closed our Series C funding round, raising $127 million from Goldman Sachs's venture capital division. The funding would allow us to expand internationally and develop AI-powered features for our platform. TechCrunch had published a major feature about our growth trajectory, and I'd been invited to ring the opening bell at NASDAQ the following month as part of a ceremony highlighting innovative B2B technology companies. But I approached the wedding as a family celebration, not a networking opportunity. I bought a simple navy dress from Nordstrom, planned to congratulate Michael and Emma, and looked forward to catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in months. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. Michael and Emma exchanged vows in the hotel's elegant ballroom while sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking Union Square. During the cocktail hour, I enjoyed conversations with aunts, uncles, and cousins about their lives, travels, and career updates. Several relatives asked about my work, and I gave my usual brief answers about helping businesses with their technology needs. Jessica, meanwhile, was in full networking mode. She'd researched several wedding guests in advance and was strategically introducing herself to people with impressive job titles. I watched her charm Michael's law firm colleagues and Emma's finance industry friends, describing her background in growth marketing for venture-backed technology companies. The reception dinner was where everything fell apart, though it started pleasantly enough. Our family table included my parents, Jessica, myself, Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret from Sacramento, and our cousin Lisa with her husband Tom, who worked in pharmaceutical sales. The conversation began with typical family updates. Uncle Robert had retired from his career as a high school principal. Aunt Margaret was volunteering with a literacy program. Lisa and Tom were considering buying a larger house now that their children were teenagers. Then Lisa asked Jessica about her job search, and Jessica launched into a well-rehearsed explanation of how she was being selective about opportunities and looking for the right cultural fit after her previous company had restructured their marketing department. The tech industry has become so volatile, Jessica said, cutting into her salmon. These startups promise the world, but most of them don't have sustainable business models. I've learned to be more cautious about the companies I work for. Tom nodded sympathetically. It must be stressful not knowing if your company will be around next year. Exactly, Jessica continued. That's why I'm focusing on more established companies now. Places with real revenue and proper management structures. She glanced at me with what I initially thought was sisterly solidarity, but her next words revealed something different. Sarah's been lucky working for the same little company for so long, Jessica said, her tone carrying an edge I hadn't noticed before. Most of us in tech have to deal with constant job hopping and uncertainty. I looked up from my dinner, surprised by the characterization. Actually, DataFlow Solutions has been growing really consistently. Right, but it's different when you're in a support role, Jessica interrupted, smiling at our relatives. Sarah does IT support and administrative work. It's much more stable than being in business development or strategic roles where you're responsible for company growth. The table fell quiet for a moment. I felt heat rising in my chest, not just from the dismissive characterization of my work, but from the confidence with which Jessica was speaking about my career to our family. I wouldn't exactly call it a support role, I said carefully. I'm pretty involved in the business strategy and, of course you are, Jessica said with a laugh that sounded patronizing. Everyone's job feels important to them. But let's be honest, Sarah. You're basically a glorified secretary who happens to work at a tech company. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had just started. Our uncle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My parents looked confused, clearly unsure whether Jessica was joking or making a serious point about career hierarchies. Jessica, my mother said quietly, that doesn't sound very nice. I'm not being mean, Jessica replied, her voice taking on the defensive tone she'd used since childhood when called out for inappropriate behavior. I'm just being realistic about job functions. Sarah answers phones, schedules meetings, maybe does some data entry. It's honest work, but it's not the same as driving business results. I felt something snap inside me, not anger exactly, but a sudden clarity about how long I'd been allowing my family to misunderstand my life in service of keeping peace and protecting Jessica's feelings. Actually, I said, setting down my fork and looking directly at Jessica, I'm the CEO and majority owner of DataFlow Solutions. We just closed a $127 million funding round last month, and the company is valued at about $847 million. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced at a family gathering. It was the sound of assumptions crashing, of a narrative that had been years in the building suddenly collapsing. Jessica's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, then something that looked almost like panic. Wait, what? Lisa said finally. Sarah, are you saying you own the company? I founded it 6 years ago, I replied, my voice steady but my heart pounding. We have 312 employees now across offices in Palo Alto, Austin, and Denver. We provide data integration services for about 2,800 businesses, including some Fortune 500 companies. Uncle Robert leaned forward. Sarah, when you said you worked in tech, we thought. I know what you thought, I said gently. I've never corrected the assumption because it seemed easier than explaining the details. My father was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Sarah, are you saying you're like a boss of this company? I'm the chief executive officer, I said. I make the final decisions about company strategy, hiring, partnerships, and how we spend our investment funding. Jessica had gone pale. But you never said. You always talked like you were just an employee. You never asked what I actually did, I replied. You assumed, and I didn't correct you. The conversation that followed was surreal. My family peppered me with questions about the business, my responsibilities, my employees, my income. I answered honestly but without unnecessary detail, explaining that DataFlow Solutions had grown faster than I'd initially projected, and that yes, my personal financial situation was quite comfortable. Jessica remained mostly silent during these explanations, occasionally asking questions that revealed how completely she'd misunderstood my career trajectory. But when did this happen? She asked at one point. When did you become the owner? I started the company in 2018, I explained. I've been the CEO since day one. That was 5 years ago, she said, as if doing math in her head. You mean, this whole time, while I was telling you about my startup jobs? You were talking to someone who actually ran a startup, yes, I said. The revelation recontextualized years of family interactions. Every time Jessica had complained about unreasonable startup founders, she'd been complaining to a startup founder. Every time she'd made jokes about tech executives being out of touch with their employees, she'd been talking to someone who had built a company culture that prioritized work-life balance and employee satisfaction. Every time she'd offered me career advice or suggested I should be more ambitious, she'd been talking to someone whose professional achievements far exceeded her own. But the most uncomfortable realization for Jessica, and for me, was that every time she'd spoken condescendingly about my little computer job, she'd been revealing how little she actually knew about my life and how little she'd bothered to learn. The wedding reception continued around us, but our family table had become an island of awkward revelation. Other guests were dancing, toasting Michael and Emma, enjoying the celebration, while we sat in the wreckage of assumptions that had shaped our family dynamics for years. Jessica excused herself to go to the bathroom and didn't return for 20 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were red, and her careful makeup had been touched up. I think I should go, she said quietly to our parents. I'm getting a headache. My mother looked concerned. Do you want us to come with you? No. Stay and enjoy the wedding, Jessica said. She looked at me briefly, but couldn't seem to maintain eye contact. Sarah, we should talk sometime. Of course, I said. Whenever you're ready. She gathered her purse and wrap and left, without saying goodbye to Michael and Emma, which I knew would bother her later because Jessica was usually meticulous about social courtesies. The rest of the evening was strange but not unpleasant. My parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins asked more questions about DataFlow Solutions, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to talk openly about work I was passionate about. Uncle Robert was particularly interested in how we helped small businesses, since several of his former teaching colleagues had started consulting practices after retirement. My father, who had always been quiet about his own career disappointments, asked thoughtful questions about hiring practices and employee development. I realized he was processing not just information about my success, but also reconsidering his own assumptions about American business culture and opportunity. I'm proud of you, he said simply as we were leaving the hotel. I wish I had understood sooner what you were building. The conversation with Jessica came 3 days later. She called and asked if she could come over to my condo to talk privately. I agreed, though I wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation. She arrived with coffee from our favorite cafe in Chinatown, a peace offering that acknowledged the gravity of what had happened at the wedding. We sat on my balcony overlooking the hills of Palo Alto, and for several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I need to apologize," Jessica said finally. "Not just for what I said at the wedding, but for everything. For years of not really listening when you talked about your work. For assuming I understood your life without asking questions. For making jokes about tech workers without realizing I was talking about you." I appreciated the apology, but I was more interested in understanding how we'd gotten to that point. "Jessica, why do you think you assumed I was in a support role?" I asked. "What made you so confident about something you'd never actually investigated?" She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the view. "Honestly, because it made me feel better about my own career struggles. If you were just doing administrative work, then my marketing roles were more important and impressive. If you were successful in ways I didn't understand, then I had to confront some uncomfortable questions about my own choices." This was the most honest conversation we'd had about our relationship in years. "I've been jealous of you since we were kids," she continued. "You were always the smart one, the one who got good grades without trying, the one who seemed to have everything figured out. When I became the social one, the one with the exciting stories and dramatic adventures, it felt like I'd finally found my thing." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "When we both started working in tech, I thought I was finally in your world, but with better people skills and more strategic thinking. I thought I was the one who understood business while you were stuck in technical details. It made me feel like we were equals, or maybe like I was actually ahead of you for once." I understood her perspective, even though it had been painful to be on the receiving end of it. "The thing is," I said, "I never thought of us as competing. I was proud of your communication skills and your ability to build relationships. I just wished you'd been curious about what I was actually doing instead of assuming you already knew." "I was scared to ask," she admitted, "because part of me suspected that your quiet confidence meant you knew something I didn't. It was easier to convince myself that you were just good at a narrow technical skill than to consider that you might understand business better than I did." We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, unpacking years of miscommunication and missed opportunities for genuine connection. Jessica shared details about her job struggles that she'd never mentioned before, how she'd been passed over for promotions, how she'd watched less qualified men advance faster, how she'd started to doubt her own abilities after repeated setbacks. I shared some of the challenges of running a business that I'd never discussed with family, the stress of making decisions that affected hundreds of employees, the loneliness of being responsible for everyone else's job security, the difficulty of maintaining work-life balance when every business decision felt critical. "Can I ask you something?" Jessica said as our conversation was winding down. "When I was networking at the wedding and talking about startup culture like I was an expert, how did that feel, knowing that you actually ran one?" I considered the question carefully. It felt sad mostly, because I wanted to be able to share what I'd learned with you, but you never seemed interested in my perspective. You were so confident about your understanding of the industry that there wasn't room for me to contribute to the conversation. "God, I was such an idiot," she said, covering her face with her hands. "You weren't an idiot," I replied. "You were protective of your expertise in an area where you felt confident. I understand that impulse. I just wish we'd been able to have more honest conversations along the way." The weeks following that conversation brought unexpected changes to our family dynamics. Jessica started asking me thoughtful questions about business strategy, employee management, and industry trends. I began sharing more details about DataFlow Solutions' growth and the challenges of scaling a technology company. My parents, meanwhile, were processing their own assumptions about success and recognition. They'd spent years worrying that I was too quiet, too focused on work, not ambitious enough to achieve significant professional success. Learning that I'd already built something substantial while they'd been concerned about my career prospects was a revelation that prompted several family conversations about communication and assumption. The most significant change, though, was in my own approach to family relationships. I realized that my strategy of avoiding conflict by staying quiet about my achievements had actually created more problems than it solved. By allowing misconceptions to persist, I'd enabled a dynamic where Jessica felt superior in professional matters, while I felt unseen and undervalued. Moving forward, I committed to being more direct about my life and work, even when it might create uncomfortable moments or challenge family narratives. This shift was tested 2 months later when Jessica asked if I could help her find a new job. But this time, the conversation was completely different. "I know I don't have the right to ask this after how I treated you," she said, "but I'm wondering if you have any advice about career transitions, not necessarily introductions to specific companies, but strategic guidance about how to position myself for roles where I can actually contribute value." The humility in her request was striking, and it opened the door for me to share insights I'd been holding back for years. We spent several evenings discussing her career goals, her strengths and development areas, and realistic pathways for advancing in marketing roles at growing companies. I was able to connect her with the marketing director at one of our client companies, a sustainable packaging startup that was looking for someone with experience in both traditional and digital marketing channels. Jessica approached the opportunity with genuine curiosity about the company's mission and realistic expectations about the role's responsibilities. She got the job, and 6 months later, she's thriving in an environment where her communication skills and creative thinking are genuinely valued. More importantly, she's building her career on authentic achievements rather than inflated narratives about her experience. The transformation in our relationship has been remarkable. Jessica recently attended DataFlow Solutions' annual company retreat as my guest, and she spent the weekend asking thoughtful questions about our business model, our company culture, and my leadership approach. Several of my employees commented afterward about how insightful her questions were and how much they enjoyed meeting my sister. During the retreat, Jessica gave a presentation to our marketing team about brand storytelling techniques she'd learned in her new role. It was the first time she'd shared her expertise with my professional community, and the first time I'd been able to showcase her talents to people who could appreciate her skills. The story has an interesting epilogue that happened just last month. Jessica called me, laughing, to tell me about a conversation she'd had with our cousin Lisa, who had asked for career advice for her teenage daughter, who was interested in studying computer science. "I told Lisa she should definitely talk to you," Jessica said, and Lisa was like, "But Sarah works in IT support, right?" I got to explain that you're actually the CEO of a major tech company and would be a perfect mentor for someone interested in entrepreneurship. It felt good to know that Jessica was now actively correcting family misconceptions about my career, rather than perpetuating them. But the best part of our transformed relationship is the way we've learned to support each other's professional growth without competition or comparison. When I was invited to speak at a Women in Technology conference last month, Jessica helped me refine my presentation about building inclusive company cultures. When she was promoted to marketing director at her company, I sent flowers to her office with a note that said, "Proud of your authentic success." The glorified secretary comment that once felt so dismissive has become something of a family joke. At Thanksgiving dinner last year, Jessica raised her glass and said, "Here's to Sarah, the most successful glorified secretary in Silicon Valley." Everyone laughed, including me, because we all understood the journey that had brought us to that moment of genuine appreciation and connection. Looking back on that wedding reception moment 8 months later, I realized that Jessica's glorified secretary comment was actually a gift. though neither of us recognized it at the time. It forced us to confront years of assumptions, miscommunication, and missed opportunities for genuine connection. The revelation about my career success wasn't the real turning point in our relationship. It was what happened afterward. The honest conversations about jealousy, insecurity, and the ways we'd been protecting ourselves from uncomfortable truths. The recognition that both of us had been operating from fear rather than curiosity about each other's lives. Jessica's assumption that I was in a support role wasn't just about career hierarchies. It was about her need to maintain a narrative where she was the sister with the impressive professional life, the one who understood business strategy and industry dynamics. My silence about DataFlow Solutions wasn't just about humility. It was about avoiding conflict and maintaining family harmony, even at the cost of authentic relationship. What we both learned was that genuine relationships require the courage to be seen fully, even when that visibility challenges comfortable assumptions or family roles that no longer serve us. Today, Jessica and I text regularly about work challenges, industry trends, and career decisions. She asks for my advice on business strategy questions, and I ask for her input on marketing campaigns and brand messaging. We've found ways to learn from each other's expertise without competition or condescension. My parents have also evolved in how they talk about success and ambition. They've started asking more specific questions about both Jessica's and my work, rather than making assumptions based on surface-level details. They've begun to understand that meaningful achievement often happens quietly, without fanfare or family announcements. The most profound change, though, has been in my own relationship with success and recognition. I spent years minimizing my achievements to avoid making others uncomfortable, but I've learned that this approach doesn't actually protect anyone. It prevents genuine celebration of accomplishments, creates space for harmful assumptions, and robs relationships of the depth that comes from truly knowing each other. DataFlow Solutions continues to grow. We're now serving over 4,200 businesses and have expanded to 7 countries. I was recently named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 list and have been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about technology's role in supporting small business growth. But the professional recognition that means the most to me is knowing that my employees feel valued, that our clients see real improvements in their business operations, and that we're building something sustainable that creates opportunities for others. Jessica, meanwhile, was promoted to Senior Marketing Manager at her company last month. She's leading a campaign to help eco-conscious consumers understand the environmental impact of their packaging choices, work that combines her communication skills with a mission she's passionate about. The best part is that we can now celebrate each other's achievements authentically. When Jessica told me about her promotion, I could congratulate her with genuine enthusiasm, knowing that her success was built on real contributions rather than inflated narratives. When I shared news about DataFlow Solutions' international expansion, she asked thoughtful questions about the challenges of managing remote teams across different time zones. We've learned to have the kind of relationship we both actually wanted, one based on mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's lives, and the security that comes from being truly known and valued. The wedding revelation was dramatic, but the real work happened in the months afterward. The patient conversations, the willingness to examine our own motivations and assumptions, the commitment to building something better between us. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or if you've been underestimated by people who should support you, I want you to know that it's possible to change those dynamics. It requires courage to be vulnerable about your achievements and struggles. It requires the patience to have difficult conversations about jealousy, competition, and the stories we tell ourselves about each other's lives. Most importantly, it requires the commitment to show up authentically, even when that authenticity challenges family narratives that have been years in the making. Have you ever been in a situation where family assumptions about your life were completely wrong? What would you have done if you were in my position at that wedding reception? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more content about family dynamics, career success, and the courage to live authentically. And remember, your achievements matter, whether or not your family understands them yet. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, keep building the life you want. And don't be afraid to let people see who you really are.